we have another quality which is called Sat. Sat means eternal existence. The soul is eternally existing in the spiritual world, in the world of time. Eternal means no beginning, no end. Only material things have a beginning and an end. Only material things go through changes. The soul doesn't ever change. I was explaining earlier, just like the sky. Sometimes it's clear like it is today, and the sky seems to be in its natural state. But sometimes clouds come, rain comes, smoke or pollution or winds or dust, hail even. Crazy things can happen in the sky. But afterwards, the sky clears up and then it's again in its natural state. So the sky is never affected by the clouds and the rain and other stuff that comes through it. Similarly, consciousness, even though we may have so many experiences of different qualities, the consciousness itself is never affected. The consciousness never changes. Consciousness is a one constant thing that is always the same and is present everywhere. And the proof is that, like we were talking about before, you can postulate the point of view of your consciousness to be actually anywhere, anytime. Time and space, these things, this whole domain, this space-time domain, we have complete freedom within that domain. That's a natural consequence or a natural quality of the soul. And when we become conscious of this domain, then we start to experience these features of the consciousness domain, Sat, Chit, and one more which has to do with possibilities that we call Ananda, bliss. So the qualities of the soul are Sat, eternal existence, Chit, eternal consciousness, and Ananda, or infinite possibilities. But we only experience this when we are aware of the spiritual domain, the time domain. We don't experience this in material life, or we do, but to a very, very limited extent. Why? Because our existence here is conditioned by material laws. Material law affects material objects, and spiritual laws affect spiritual objects. And the two don't mix, like oil and water. You can temporarily force them to mix by shaking up the container or something. But then they immediately separate due to their different natures. So right now we're like oil and water. We're mixed up with this material body. And it's very confusing because the material body functions according to completely different laws than the spiritual body. We have a spiritual body. And the soul is non-different from the spiritual body. But we've forgotten that body, and now we're identified with this body, and because of that, we're in so much trouble. We have to go through so many uncomfortable experiences, like gestation and birth and growing up and being picked on by the big kids, and then we have to work for a living and struggle to make so much money or make our way in the world, and then we have family and we have all those issues, and then finally we get old and we retire and then the body starts to fall apart, and so many problems one after another, all due to the change of the body. The body is constantly changing. The body, like every material object, goes through 7 stages of manifestation: conception, gestation, birth, growth, work or the production of byproducts, dwindling, and death. Everything in the material world goes through those 7 stages unavoidably by the pressure of time. So we find ourselves, pushed into this material world, like squeezed out like a tube of toothpaste from the womb. And then we have to deal with it. So we go searching for knowledge. And what do we find? We find there's these great knowledge traditions in the world, and they all say the same thing. You're not this body, you're the soul within. But because none of them are truly contemporary, none of them are actually living, all the ancient wisdom traditions have been interrupted. Therefore, they're of limited value because they're not really connected with their roots. They're not really grounded. Only the Vedic tradition. The Vedic tradition is the only tradition that is still alive and originated before the current age of degradation. Before 5,000 years or so ago, when things started getting really heavy on this planet. And up until that time, there were many traditions all over the world. But most of them have been destroyed in the last 5,000 years, or interrupted. And we may have their relics, we may have their books, we may have some cave paintings, or some sculptures, or some Rosetta Stones, or something like that. Ruins. But we don't have a living tradition that's been passed on from master to student all that time, except for the Vedas. The Vedas go back more than 100,000 years. And the esoteric teaching is like the essence of that tradition. It's an enormous tradition. If you had all the Vedic literatures, let's say, collected in this house, it would like fill the whole building. There's an enormous volume of literature there, all in the Sanskrit language. And it's all written by people of enlightened consciousness. And then they pass that knowledge down to their disciples, not just book learning. The records are there just to verify everything and to keep everybody straight. The real thing is passed down as like a personal apprenticeship from master to student. And this has been going on now for thousands and thousands of years. And they have all kinds of safeguards to prevent changing the knowledge. Like there are checksums built into the Sanskrit poetry so it can't be changed without somebody catching on. And then there are 4 repositories of identical historical literatures in 4 places in India, and they periodically cross-check them with each other to make sure that the continuity of the knowledge is there. So the Vedic tradition is the only one that hasn't changed, that hasn't been altered, that hasn't been destroyed. When the British took over India and the Muslims took over India, they went underground. They went into their caves, where nobody could find them, and they kept these traditions alive in secret. And now the internet is allowing us to bring these traditions out and actually share them with the whole world without changing anything. We have all the Vedic literatures on our site. You can download them, you can read them at your leisure, and you can also post questions and we'll respond. So,
can we ask questions?
Oh, anytime.
The 100,000 years that you mentioned are kind of very hard to understand. It seems much longer than any other trace of cultural activity of human beings. So, what is the evidence, and what makes us believe that it's 100,000 years?
Okay. Uwe is asking, for the people on the web, he's saying that 100,000 years seems to be a very long time for any tradition. And where's the evidence that this tradition is correct? Well, there's a lot of evidence. Take, for example, the Ramayana. Ramayana describes the appearance of Lord Ramchandra 1.6 million years ago on this planet. And one of his pastimes was that he built a bridge from India to Lanka with the help of the monkey race, the Vanaras. So nobody knew of this bridge. It seemed like a lost thing until the space shuttles started taking pictures from orbit, and they took a beautiful set of pictures that you could see the remnants of this bridge under the water in the Hormuz Strait between India and Sri Lanka. And subsequently geologists went and examined it, and they estimated that the age was 1.6 million years. So that's there. And then there's what's another good example? The city of Dwarka. The city of Dwarka was Krishna's capital city, and that was supposed to be off the coast of Gujarat, what is now Gujarat. And Gujarat, if you go there, you don't see anything, of course, because the whole city sank. As soon as Krishna left the planet, the city sank under the water. That's described in the scriptures. So, of course, nobody knew where the city was located exactly, but then when side-looking radar came out, they were able to do a scan of the ocean floor, and there's just a huge area of ruins there, an enormous area that precisely matches the description of the location at the mouth of the Saraswati River. However, there's no river there today. So people were saying, no, that couldn't be right because nobody has ever observed the Saraswati River. What is, the possibility that this is the actual location? Well, then again, by radar from a satellite this time, they found an old riverbed in exactly the location of the Saraswati River that's given in the Vedas. What happened was there was some kind of an earth movement, some kind of a tectonic shift, and the water that was coming down into that valley suddenly got shunted over into this other river valley, and so the Saraswati River dried up. So now that India is doing its own archaeology, and they're not under the British anymore, they're finding all of these old towns that were mentioned in the Vedas as being on the banks of the Saraswati in this dried up river valley. Of course,